CERT believes that libraries and those who work in libraries must center social responsibility by recognizing and helping to solve social problems and equities to work for the common good. My name is Julianne Winkelstein. My pronouns are she and her, and I am going to be your moderator for this session. I am joined by the chat monitor, Lisa Gieskis, and tech person, April Shepard. To enable captions, click More in the bottom right of the screen and then click Show Captions. Our session will be recorded and the recording will be available on our website within a few weeks. I have one note about AI. CERT prohibits the use of AI during our programming unless there is an expressed accessibility need, which it needs to function, needs it to meet the function of it. If this is the case, please send a message in the chat to the hosts and we will work to address it. So just to let you know about that. This session focuses on civic engagement and strategies for social change, the ballot and beyond, and it runs from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. Central Time. As you saw in the description, we'll be talking about expanding voter participation, removing barriers to civic involvement, and looking at the limits of electoral politics and considering other approaches to advancing social change. I'm going to give a brief introduction of our 5 panelists, actually right now 4 panelists. And their full bios are available on our website. And if you haven't read them already, I encourage you to do that. Let me get this to be full screen somehow. Sorry, all these little technical things. Full screen. Okay. All right. First is Emily Pollock, is VoteRiders Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Organizing, where she works to help ensure VoteRiders Health Center Association, hospital, health system, and academic partners have the resources and support they need to weave nonpartisan civic engagement materials into the healthcare spaces. Prior to her time at VoteRiders, Emily spent over a decade at Community Catalyst, advancing health advocacy work at the local, state, and national levels. Next, David Daley is the author of 2 national bestsellers, including Anti-Democratic Inside the Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. He has another title, but I wasn't sure how to read it aloud. So when you read his full bio, you'll get the other title. He's considered one of the nation's leading experts in gerrymandering, voting rights, and the Roberts Court. David has taught political science and journalism as a visiting professor at Wesleyan University, Smith College, and Boston College. He's the former editor-in-chief of Selene and a senior fellow at FairVote. Kat isn't here right now, so I'll wait to read her bio and hope that she shows up. I just wrote that down. Selene, right? Dr. Selene Gomez currently serves as VoteRiders National Field Director. Over a decade of deep involvement in the nonprofit sector forms the foundation of her advocacy. In addition to her work as a practitioner, Dr. Gomez's research focuses on political behavior, voter access, and state-level variation in democratic institutions. Her research examines the intersections of election law, political participation, racialization, and structural racism to analyze how institutional designs and policy regimes shape unequal access to democratic participation. Chris Rudd is an award-winning designer, community organizer, and founder of Shy by Design, a Black-owned and people of color-led social and civic design firm. Chris has a deep background in social equity work, systems change, and youth development. He's worked with youth and community residents across Chicago, supporting them and designing new anti-racist infrastructures to enable an equitable future. Chris is a former clinical professor of practice and lead of community-led design at the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. Before we begin, I just want to let you know we will be taking questions for the panelists, but after all the presentations. Please use the Q&A to pose questions, and you can do this at any time while they're talking. And we are going to keep the chat for any tech issues, or if you want to share some resources or appreciations for our panelists. And now on to our first presenter, Emily Pollock. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks so much, Julie, and everybody who's in the room. And I just want to recognize I'm a little bit of a weird person to start because what VoteR does is slightly niche in terms of working to integrate nonpartisan voter registration and voter turnout and civic engagement into healthcare spaces. But Julie and the other panelists were very accommodating. I have to pick my kids up from camp at some point later in the afternoon. I'm on the East Coast. So thank you all for that. And just bear with me for being slightly niche in terms of civic engagement and healthcare spaces. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some slides that I brought to the session today. So we did a tech check. Let's just make sure this loads up okay. Um, all right. Julie and April, are we good that you can see the main slide, but you cannot see my notes?
Correct.
Great. All right. So, just once again, as Julie named, I am Emily Pollock. I am VoteR's Vice President of Partnerships and Organizing. And I bring to this work a background of health advocacy and civic engagement through a number of different campaigns and nonpartisan lenses. And we are just delighted to be in the room with you all today. In a very quick overview, nutshell of what is VoteR, we really work to provide patients, healthcare professionals, and the communities that they serve the opportunity to register and turn out to vote. Realizing that so much of our healthcare system and healthcare experiences, in fact, roughly 80%, are actually determined outside of the walls of a clinic. And so we know that voting and health are deeply, deeply intertwined. And so, from VoteR's standpoint, voter registration opportunities should be integrated into the healthcare system. Currently, VoteR collaborates with over 2,100 different hospitals, clinics, health associations all across the country in all 50 states, along with over 80,000 different health professionals and advocates who are using our tools and resources to support voter engagement. Okay, just as a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to provide folks with a little bit of understanding about this link between voting and health. I will orient you to how VoteR provides these interventions to support broader civic engagement. I'll just address a couple of legal questions that sometimes come up, and then I'll give everybody the tools to take a next step if you are in some shape or form affiliated with some kind of healthcare space. And that can be broad strokes, you as a patient, it could be you as a practitioner, anywhere in between. But first, because I am the first person to go, sorry everybody else on the call in case you were going to do this, I'm going to ask everybody in the room to take a quick scan of this QR code and check that your voter registration is actually up to date at your current address. If you can't scan it with your phone and use the QR code, you can just go to www.vote.health and that'll orient you to VoteR's tool. The reason I'm doing this, even if you are 100% positive that you are registered to vote at your current address, I want to show you how easy this tool is. And I'm sure partners in the room use similar tools too. And that way you can also take this and you can share it with your communities and your family and your friends to make sure that they are all registered to vote at their current address as well. So we'll take another minute or so. Um, and of course, feel free to put in the chat if anybody has any troubles, but I tested it this morning. It works perfectly. And it should really be smooth sailing. Julie, I'm watching you do it. So when you're done, I'll know that the audience is probably generally pretty ready to keep going. Should have music. Sorry about that. That would make voter registration that much more fun.
I hate to slow this down by my slow typing.
No, that's okay. All right. So I'll give people one more minute and Julie, you'll continue. Totally fine. And I will just also name to the point of my request to do it, even if you are 100% sure, we know that voter rolls have been changing and states have been purging voter rolls to ensure that everybody on it is an active registered voter. So again, there's no harm in just double or triple checking right now. Okay. Well, if people finish that up, I will keep moving because I know we're on a tight ship here. Um, so I wanted to share a little bit about the link between voting and health and VoteR, how we approach this intersection. We can see the relationship between health and voting through this index, which our friends at Healthy Democracy, Healthy People, and the Institute for Responsive Government have really done a ton of tremendous research into. But generally speaking, states that have more inclusive voting access actually have better health outcomes for those communities in those states. And conversely, states with less voting access have worse health outcomes. So we use this plus a number of other data sources to really help orient us that research truly demonstrates that when more people in a community vote, we actually holistically see better health outcomes for the entirety of that community. And so, based on that, we really look at voting as part of these structural determinants of health and social determinants of health. We're looking at how we can begin to address those determinants of health when we point our interventions towards the structural determinants of health. And that's really where voting comes in. We see voting playing a role in the upstream causes. And we think that it is one of the most effective interventions to help address health related social needs. For VoteR, we also recognize that oftentimes so much attention is paid to the top of a ticket on ballots, whether it's this upcoming midterm cycle or a presidential cycle. But we also know that the reality of so much of what shapes somebody's health and a community's health is down ballot too, whether it's a school board or a city council election or ballot initiatives or state legislative races. And these are truly elections where decisions about climate, which can have major health implications, are made. These are elections that decide who might, for example, be a coroner in the South. And these elections impact state level laws around reproductive health, for example. And so when it comes to patients' lives and communities' health and the rules that impact hospitals and drive health outcomes, so much of these decisions are made locally. And so that's why VoteR really works year in, year out. We're not just an even election cycle year organization, but we know that it is local, state, and federal elections that matter when it comes to influencing and impacting people's health. We also came out at the realization that there's a major issue in our democracy and our healthcare systems. Here in the United States, there are roughly 72 million eligible people who are not registered to vote. And that actually is roughly equivalent to the population of France. And oftentimes, the number one reason that we have learned that so many of those eligible folks are not registered is because they haven't been asked. So consider yourselves asked. I asked you at the beginning to check your voter registration. From a survey done from the Pew Charitable Trust, we actually know that 62% of unregistered eligible voters have never been asked. And that's the number one reason that they cite as not being registered to vote. Similarly, when you look at the top three groups of people who disproportionately make up those 72 million unregistered but eligible voters, they are predominantly young people, they're low income people, and they're people of color and the intersecting identities therein. And so when a health center, a community health center, a hospital, a clinic sees the patients who come in for low acuity complaints or the folks who happen to be also most marginalized by our healthcare system, it's these same three groups of people. And so VoteR really operates around the premise. What if we ask these patients to register to vote, meeting them exactly where they already are in their healthcare spaces? We ask it by a trusted messenger, their practitioner, the admin staff, their intake person, and we give them the tools right then and there. We believe that we can begin to transform community health and improve health outcomes in this way. Um, we also know that it's healthcare professionals who need to be asked and reminded to register and turn out to vote. A 2021 study from the Journal of General Internal Medicine found that health professionals are 12 to 23% less likely to vote than the general population. And some of that might be attributed to schedules and busy work needs. But we really want to make sure that there is more accessibility across the board for patients, for staff at health institutions. So we're talking about food service and security and front desk staff and the practitioners themselves. So we really think that it's essential that everybody who makes up our healthcare system, of which we're all a part of, is registered and turning out to vote. VoteR has worked with major national institutions like the American Medical Association to actually name voting as a social determinant of health. They passed in 2022 a resolution recognizing this. We've done similar work with other national associations like the American College of Physicians, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Nurses Association, the National Association of Community Health Workers. We really work up and down the ladder with national, state, and local organizations to acknowledge this intersection. We also worked with the Association of American Medical Colleges because they are future practitioners, and we are working to embed this notion of civic health for future health professionals to bring it into their patient and clinic and workspaces. So how does VoteR do this? As I slightly alluded to, we believe that the healthcare space has a unique opportunity, and that is because it is healthcare professionals. And the surveys tell us about doctors, they tell us about nurses, and they tell us about pharmacists. I would actually venture to say that probably community health workers, birth justice practitioners, they are probably right up there in terms of being trusted messengers. But they're not often included as categories of professionals in these surveys. But these are folks who are trusted in an era when there is so much distrust um, and so much distrust of professions that have traditionally been trusted. We can still continue to see that it is healthcare voices who are trusted messengers. And so VoteR works to elevate that power. We do it through a number of different programs and efforts. Number one, and I'm wearing mine today, we have these voter registration badges. So we provide these to the healthcare professionals. They're all free, they're fiercely nonpartisan. And the whole intention is that you are in there sitting with your healthcare professional and they're doing a social intake survey. Are you safe at home? Do you wear your seatbelt? Oh, are you registered to vote? And Julie's like, I'm not sure. So Dr. Emily is like, okay, Julie, pull out your own phone. So it's fully HIPAA compliant. Scan this badge, scan the QR code on my badge, and you can check your own voter registration. And so by having these one-on-one conversations through that trusted messenger, again, meeting somebody right where they are in the clinic space, we're giving people an opportunity to raise their civic health. We also provide a number of different customized digital materials for institutions, for clinics, for associations. We provide email and texting templates that help staff and patients register to vote. And then we do those same things, those same interventions to do get out the vote efforts to remind people to show up when it's election day. Our tools are intentionally non-disruptive, they're optional, and they're nonpartisan. We were actually founded by an emergency room physician who saw the ER as this amazing opportunity to engage with folks. And so our grounding in healthcare spaces and being built up by practitioners means that these tools are what practitioners find to be useful and accessible. We have a number of different programs as well. We have civic health partnerships with hospitals and associations all over the country. And this ranges from very, very large hospital systems in a state to interstate hospital and health associations. We work with federally qualified health centers and community health centers to make sure that their staff and their patients are all given the opportunity to register and turn out to vote for those who are eligible. And then we have something very cool called the Healthy Democracy Campaign, where we are training future health professionals like med students and nursing students and social work students and public health students. And they actually earn points for building civic engagement into their academic spaces. And then there's a Healthy Democracy Champion coined at the end of the election cycle. This is just one of our friends, Dr. Peggy Stager. She's in Ohio. She's a pediatrician. This was actually a news clip about her and showing her using the badge with one of her patients who had recently turned voting eligible age. We also just wanted to lift up some of these important quotes from the health professionals themselves who can attest to why this belongs in healthcare spaces. One of our dear friends and partners is at Einstein Health in Pennsylvania. Um, Something interesting, and again, for those who might be healthcare professionals in the room, we have found that amongst the folks who are using our tools, using these tools, having these conversations with their patients, with their colleagues, with the staff at their institutions, helps improve their morale and improves their own sense of agency to affect change. I think at a time when folks are looking for ways to engage, especially in nonpartisan civic engagement efforts, to make sure that our turnout this upcoming midterm cycle is as robust as possible. VoteR is a really accessible tool for folks. So just a little bit on some legal FAQs because folks are like, wait, how can you do that in healthcare spaces? The answer is there's long-standing precedent and federal guidelines that allow nonprofits, 501(c)(3)s, to do nonpartisan civic engagement work. That includes voter registration, it includes voter education, and it includes Get Out the Vote, GOTV efforts. All of this is in strict accordance with the IRS. It's in compliance with the National Voter Registration Act that was passed in 1993 that allows nonprofits to do this work. And it is fully HIPAA compliant because, as I demonstrated very, very briefly, it's the patient themselves scanning the QR code and checking their own voter registration. So that information is never exchanged with the healthcare system. Um, we also provide free customized tools and resources like waiting room flyers or exam room flyers. So while you're sitting there waiting for your appointment, you can scan a similar QR code and check your own voter registration. Um, we're never endorsing any particular candidate, any particular party, or how somebody should vote on an issue. We are simply giving people the opportunity to register, to turn out, and our tools also allow them to check polling locations, early voting opportunities. You can check who is on your ballot, and all of that again is through a very, very strict nonpartisan lens. So I wanted to invite folks in the room to take the next step if you're interested. First, just lifting up some key dates coming up on the horizon. I'm sure some other folks in the room who are speaking a little bit after me may surface some of these as well. August for VoteR and a number of our partners, upwards of 400 or so, are celebrating August as Civic Health Month. It's a really great first step to get ready for the fall, where all of these key nonpartisan voter activations will be building. On September 15th, it's National Voter Registration Day. That's when thousands upon thousands of organizations are reminding people to check your voter registration. So you're in good company if you think that there's opportunity to take action then. October 27th is National Vote Early Day. And then, as folks may or may not know, November 3rd is this year's election. There's a couple of other points throughout the course of the fall, and all really good hooks to offer up voter registration and voter turnout efforts. I also wanted to give folks, and I'll put this in the chat as well, but you should feel free if you would like to order free customized materials from VoteR, we welcome that. If you scan this code or you go to this site, and again, I'll put it in the chat so you have the direct link, you will be eligible to request a free portfolio of digital materials. It'll include Zoom backgrounds, it includes printable posters, it includes flyers and conversation starters. It even includes an 8.5 by 11 page of badges that you could print out and cut up and disperse amongst folks if you're interested in that. And we would welcome that. I think as long as you are health or health adjacent and live in the world of social determinants of health, so housing security or food security or transportation access, really the list is quite large. We would be delighted to collaborate with you. So please do feel free to order some free materials. And that's it. This is my email. I welcome any questions, and I'm thrilled to be in further conversation with you all.
Thank you, Emily. That was great. I just want to say that when I first heard about this, there was a video, I think, online that I watched that, about VoteR, and I ordered my badge, because even though I work, I'm a librarian, but I ordered my badge because I just really wanted to have that badge. And I actually went to the local public library to see if they would get the people who worked at the library to order the badge, because I feel like libraries are part of the health system. We make communities healthier. So anyway, just wanted to say I'm a big fan. So thank you very much. Next we have David Daley. Turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Thank you to this amazing panel doing such amazing work. And it is a pleasure to be on a panel with the Library Association. I'm very grateful for all of the important work you all do in your institutions every day now more than ever, given all of these challenges. I approach this work perhaps a little bit differently from my colleagues on this recall, I started as a journalist, and I entered this space. Really, it came out with a simple question. I was the editor-in-chief of Salon, but almost, more than a decade ago. This is at 2013, looking at what was at the time one of the most dysfunctional Congresses that we had seen, government shutdowns, some 50 something votes to repeal Obamacare, even though the president was not going to allow that to happen. The inability of Congress to come up with any meaningful gun reform in the immediate aftermath of Sandy Hook. I don't think anybody's naive about how difficult it is to win that kind of change. But boy, if a massacre like that wasn't going to get us on the road to change, really hard to imagine what would. And I asked a really simple question, which was, why did Democrats not take back the House in 2012 when Obama's reelected with a pretty similar margin as he was elected by in 2008, when Democrats gained seats in the US Senate? Republicans held a 234, 201 edge in the House. It wasn't even close. And as I looked at it, I was kind of amazed. Like if you take a state like Pennsylvania, for example, 2008, um, the partisan breakdown in Pennsylvania for Congress was 12 Democrats and 7 Republicans. In 2012, it was 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And the actual voting was pretty similar in both years. But I said, well, boy, something must have changed in the middle of that. And every 10 years we do redistricting. It is a state process. It is controlled usually by the governor and the state legislature in most states. And when you draw different maps and new lines, you can generate completely different outcomes, even off of the exact same elections. Seemed to me that something really important had happened in the midst of the 2010 redistricting cycle. Went to the New York Times, went to the Washington Post. You can go back and you can look through all of it. No coverage of this at all. I went out, found the documents that sort of laid out the plan. I think perhaps the most audacious and effective political strategy that we have seen in some time, to go out and win state legislatures in 2010 across all sorts of purple swing states, Ohio, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, with the goal of redrawing these lines the following year after the census, and locking in electoral gains. I wrote a book about it, a book with the title of Rat Eft. It was sold as Gerrymandered Nation. And my publisher said, well, you're writing about the most boring thing in the world. You can't give the book the most boring title in the world. And by the way, nobody even knows what that is in the first place. I say all of this not as, a giant "we all told you so," but as a sign of how far that we have come. Redistricting has gotten worse. The Supreme Court has made it harder to fix, but the determination to fight back has never been stronger. The awareness has never been greater. The fixes and reforms that we are talking about, both for Congress and for the courts, have never been bolder. I would like to talk about some of them. I want to suggest at the top that there are 2 ways of talking about reform in this country. One perhaps is best reflected through Dr. King's oft-quoted observation that the arc of the moral universe is long but bends towards justice. I want to suggest that there's maybe another way of looking at it as well, which is that the arc doesn't bend on its own. It only bends when we grab it and pull it in the right direction, and that the battle over multiracial democracy in this nation has been one where we often believe that we've bent the arc towards progress, and maybe we relinquish our grip a little bit, but the forces on the other side have never let go. I wrote a book that was published, unfortunately, in March of 2020, when the entire country shut down. That was called Unrigged, and it told a lot of stories about the national fight back for democracy, for voting rights that occurred in the middle of the first um, term of the current administration. And it chronicled a lot of these state by state battles that were extraordinarily effective, even victorious, but that often didn't end in the kind of social change that people had voted for, which is because these fights are permanent. They never truly, really end. And there is always, I think it's worth thinking about social change. Social change has to be won, but then it has to be executed and it has to be defended. I was out in Idaho chronicling um, an amazing story by, a handful of young millennials who fought to expand Medicaid in the state when the state legislature decided 4 or 5 separate occasions that they would not take the Obamacare reimbursement money. And they set out, they bought a green RV, they drove to every corner of the state collecting signatures to put this on the ballot. They knocked on tens of thousands of doors across the state, and they won in Idaho in 2018 with more than 60% of the vote, right? So when you think that a change can't be won in certain parts of the country, it most certainly can be. And there were lots of these victories in 2018, 2019, even into 2020, using the initiative process. And what we have seen since then are efforts to crack down on the use of the initiative, efforts to make it much harder. You need to collect more signatures. You have to collect these signatures in more congressional districts or in more counties. You might need a higher threshold to win. Instead of 50% of the vote, you might need 60. You might have to win twice. You might have to win at the polls and then also win a vote of the legislature, which, if that was possible, perhaps citizens wouldn't be going through the extraordinary efforts of doing this in the first place, right? I went down to Florida to chronicle Desmond Meade and the amazing victorious effort there for felony reenfranchisement. Another big win, a win with more than 60% of the vote in Florida, should have been a dramatic change that brought tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people back onto the voting rolls in Florida. And what happened there, right, is that the legislature refuses to enact it, or it adds additional onerous provisions that were not in what voters demanded. And these these cases wind up in state Supreme Courts, which have been in many ways packed by ideologues in such a way that you can find a way around the people. We've seen something similar happening on redistricting. You had in 2018, 2019, Michigan, Colorado, Utah, Missouri, Ohio, lots of states work to try to take politics out of this process. There's the amazing story of Michigan, right? Which, as some of you may know, with Katie Fahey and Voters Not Politicians, and a tremendous nonpartisan drive in a state where it is very, very difficult to collect the 400,000 signatures necessary to get on the ballot, very expensive to then go out and win and amend the state constitution. They do so again with more than 60% of the vote. Similar stories out of Missouri, out of Ohio, out of Utah. And then what you see immediately after that, right, is the pendulum and the backlash swinging back. That these victories were overridden by the legislature in Missouri. They were ignored by lawmakers in Utah and in Ohio, which stiff-armed the state's Supreme Court on redistricting at the state and congressional level, not once, not twice, but 7 times in the 2021 cycle. Voters won huge victories in courts about redistricting. You had federal judges appointed by presidents of both parties, looking at maps drawn by both parties, by Democrats in Maryland, by Republicans in Ohio and Michigan and North Carolina and Wisconsin. And they said, we have all the tools that we need to fix this. And then it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2019 in a North Carolina case, Common Cause versus Rucho. And John Roberts in the court instead saw it the opposite way. They said this is a political issue that has to be decided by state legislatures. And really what they did was remove any possibility of federal enforcement. And once you do that, there's no reason for lawmakers anywhere to behave themselves. And what we end up in is this place that we are in right now. And then, of course, the court just made this dramatically more complicated with the bitter decision in the Calais case in this last term, which was a racial gerrymandering case, a Voting Rights Act case, and in many ways perhaps concludes what has been a 12-year effort to really undermine and eviscerate the Voting Rights Act. And we have already seen that there have been efforts to draw new maps in Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, Tennessee since then, and there will be even more of these as we head into the next cycle. There are reforms that can fix this. There are, big nonpartisan reforms that I think we dramatically need. I think ranked choice voting would go a long way, especially in partisan primaries. Right now, there are perhaps as few as 24 congressional races in the nation that are actually truly competitive within 5 percentage points, which means that in all of the other ones, a winner is essentially being chosen in a low turnout party primary, perhaps by as few as 15, 20,000 people. If you've got 7 or 8 people running in that race, as we have seen in some of the races this year in New Jersey and Illinois, you can win a party primary with 27, 28% of the vote, and then essentially waltz into Congress from a safe seat. We could fix gerrymandering everywhere if we had a more proportional House of Representatives. You would then see delegations in Massachusetts and in Tennessee that actually reflected the full political spectrum. But I think we will not end up with any of these changes if we don't also think about reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court. If we are not thinking about things like term limits, binding ethics codes, perhaps even a larger court. All of these changes, right, they seem hard, they seem difficult, and they are. But nothing in our moment is as hard as what folks have had to do leading up to this moment or in the other fights for American multiracial democracy. This isn't as hard as the moment before the Civil War. This isn't as hard as Reconstruction or Jim Crow or Selma or the fight for the Voting Rights Act. For generations, we've been told that constitutional change begins and ends with 9 justices in Washington. That's simply not how America was built. Long before there was a court with the authority it claims, Americans argued about the Constitution in town meetings and state legislatures and churches and labor halls around kitchen tables, they organized, they voted, they persuaded one another, they changed the law not by waiting for permission, but by exercising the power that they hold as citizens. The Constitution was never meant to belong to 9 judges alone. It belongs to all of us. These 9 lawyers do not possess unique wisdom about public health or education or elections, economics, history, science. This is a new concept in American life, and it is an idea that is worth questioning. The American experiment has always depended on citizens who refused to believe that today's status quo was permanent. Every expansion of freedom, every extension of rights, every great democratic reform began because ordinary people imagined that our country could do better and then set about making it so. Now I think we can imagine an America in which foundational ideas about liberty, about districting, about gun safety, about bodily autonomy, about religious freedom were generated by the people through a representative government and focused political action and protected with the promise of free and fair elections. That was the plan. It can still be the promise. This work of self-government begins anew every morning. That is our inheritance. That is our opportunity. I thank you.
Thank you, David. That's so much information. Like trying to absorb it all. That was great. A real good overview. Um, our next speaker is Kat Calvin, who is here, and I'm going to just read her short bio. Um, I didn't read it earlier because I wasn't sure. So Kat Calvin is an activist, author, and philanthropy advisor who has spent nearly 2 decades working on the intersection of democracy, civic participation, and social change. She's best known as the founder and executive director of Spread the Vote, Project ID, a national organization that has helped tens of thousands of Americans obtain the identification they need to vote, work, access healthcare, and fully participate in civic life. Kat is the author of American Identity in Crisis. I'm going to turn it over to you. Kat, are you ready?
I am. Okay, sorry. I've been having Zoom meeting problems. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I am particularly honored. My grandmother was a librarian, so I think that librarians are just the greatest human beings in the world. And I learned a lot from her and from watching her about how important libraries are for upholding democracy and for serving communities, which is something she was particularly good at. And then in my work later, I have learned so much more about how important and vital libraries and librarians are in the work that we do. So hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. I love you guys. Librarians and astronauts are the greatest human beings on earth. I always say it. So I'm going to break down, I'm in this very interesting place. And so I'm going to break down sort of 3 different organizations or sort of things that I work on, and talk a little bit about what they do, and try to weave in a little bit about what we all can be doing, and particularly how libraries are really important in that work, or can be. So as Julie said, I am the founder of Spread the Vote, which is an organization that I'm, along with our arm Project ID, works around the country helping people get government issued photo IDs, including all the documents that are required. I am getting them to the DMVs, all of those things. And then during elections, we worked and developed programs to help the people who we were serving be able to get to the polls. So whether it was through Vote by Mail in Jail, the only national program to help incarcerated voters vote from jail, which we had a 92% turnout among our incarcerated voters in 2024. So we're getting pretty good at that. Or Bread to Spread the Vote, which worked to financially support organized groups of community members and helping people get the vote out, or creating specialized voter guides for reservations, incarcerated folks with disabilities, things like that. And so we did a lot of work to help the people get to the polls who have the lowest percentage of people voting because of the extra barriers and challenges that are put in front of them. This March, Spread the Vote was acquired by the National Civic League, which is so great. The League is this incredible organization that was founded by Teddy Roosevelt, actually, like 120, 130 years ago. And we were really thrilled to join them. And so they have taken on that work and are now working for particularly through midterms. We're heading fast in that direction on expanding our vote by mail-in jail program and Bread to Spread the Vote, and a lot of our work that we have done around civic education and voter turnout, etc. So that is thrilling and also personally very exciting because now I'm semi-retired and no longer have to run a big organization, which is also great for me. I think that when I think about that work and how we have worked with libraries in the past, there have been, so one of the really interesting things that we've done with Vote by Mail-in Jail, and one of the reasons that it works, is that we have partnered with people who actively, daily or weekly or regularly work inside of jails. So it has been jail librarians or rabbis or counselors or people like that, who care really deeply about the people they're working with and are willing to be trained in how do you help incarcerated folks vote, because it is so much more complicated than voting when you're outside, right? There are limits on whether or not people can have pens or pencils in jail, no glitter, which as a former first grade teacher, I think there should be a federal law, a ban on glitter. I think that Congress needs to be working on this immediately. So I agree with that one. But like you can't give away free stamps because that's currency, and how many pieces of paper you can send people. See, Emily agrees, glitter is evil. I probably still have some glitter from decades back that's just hanging on to me. But it's really complicated. And so we have been so fortunate to be able to work with people inside the jails who are willing to be trained, who are willing to bring in ballots, who are willing to work individually with folks who are incarcerated to walk them through voter guides and walk them through voting and make sure that they mail their ballot. We recommend 4 weeks ahead of when they're actually due, because it takes so long for mail to get out of jails and things like that. So having those people inside who are willing to do that work has been incredible. We have worked really hard to create good relationships in communities among the unhoused communities that we work in, and doing big voter turnout and education events, and often hosting them at libraries and bringing families, having things for the kids to do, we have some of our volunteer chapters really loved making special cakes, which was very cute, and having pizza or whatever, and then walking people through their voter plan and walking them through exactly, what time is your polling place open, and where is it, and what days, and let's make a plan, and let's meet back here at the library and then drive you to the polls, etc. And as community education centers, they've been really important. And so one of the things that, particularly when you're working with groups of the most at risk and underserved communities, is having those places and those people who are open and who serve them regularly, who have been really, really incredible partners for us. So now Spread the Vote is in the hands of the ghost of Teddy Roosevelt. And I'm a senior advisor there, still helping out, but mostly I'm letting Teddy handle it. Then on the other end, we have Project ID and the Project ID Action Fund. So my mission in life is to ensure that all 26 million American adults who don't have IDs get them. I have a bill in Congress called the IDs for an Inclusive Democracy Act. And I'm actually very proud of Congress, because I think the Housing Act that they just passed is a step in the right direction. But when we get to a point where we're passing very big bills again, we're going to pass our IDs for an Inclusive Democracy Act, which will ensure a free and optional ID for every American. And one of the things actually that we put in that bill is that they will not be getting those IDs from the DMV, because we've all been to the DMV. I've spent many years of my life going to the DMV every day because I'm bad at choosing careers. And that's not a thing that anybody wants. And so the places where we are recommending that those IDs be available at the post office, because you already get passports at the post office, and libraries, because everybody has a library and librarians are the best. And so hopefully we will get congressional approval to create a safe, secure, free, and optional ID for all Americans, a federal ID that they can get at their local library. And so we are working on the passage of that bill through the Action Fund. But we also are working in a variety of ways. So Project ID has both worked on the ground across the country, just helping people get those documents, get those IDs. I'm, paying for all of it, driving people to the DMV, all of the things you sort of have to do when you work with at-risk populations. But then also working to train agencies and organizations on how to actually get IDs and putting together really good comprehensive information. You would be amazed, if you go to Vital Records for a birth certificate, they ask for your ID, but of course you need a birth certificate to get an ID. And there is a different rule, not only in all 50 states, but within most counties, within all states, on how to get a birth certificate without an ID. It's very complicated. So we created a very, very complicated guide on how to do that in most places. And so working really to help make those IDs accessible. And partially because you do need an ID to vote in most states, but also you need an ID to get jobs and housing and benefits and put your kids in school and all of the things that make a person feel like they are part of their democracy, that they are a citizen. One of the things people say to us most often when they get an ID is, I'm a person again. And you don't feel that you are able to engage in your civic duty and responsibility if you don't think you're a person, and if you don't think that you actually belong to that democracy, that you really are a citizen. And so one of the things we found very, very, very early on day one was the important thing is not getting someone an ID so they can vote. The important thing is getting someone an ID so that they can live. And then once they feel that they can do that, it is so much easier to get them to want to engage, because everybody wants to engage, everybody wants to work. Those are the two things that we have found over and over again. So that is the work we've done there. And I think one of the things that's been exciting and interesting for me, and I've had a lot of really great conversations with librarians and social workers, and this movement that has been happening to employ more social workers in libraries has been really incredible, because that is the work that you guys are doing. And it is, everything from having librarians who are actually helping people fill out job applications and birth certificate applications and all of those things, to just being the place where people can use the internet. Our community that we worked with, we did a big survey once, and only 2% of them had regular access to a phone. So fewer than that had regular access to the internet. And so where did they go? Well, they went to their library. And so that has been a really important center for us of working with librarians on teaching sort of, this is how you get an ID in Austin, Texas, or Chattanooga, or wherever, and here's the documents, and how can we help provide the things that are useful to help make your jobs easier. And so those have been some really incredible partnerships. And so now that I'm semi-retired, my quickly advancing age is I'm working with some friends, because one of the things that we have realized in this moment on the sort of philanthropy and giving side of the nonprofit space is that when it comes to work that is in the democracy sphere, which, everybody defines differently. There are many people, and I agree, that climate change is a democracy issue, right? So it can get pretty wide, or some people get very narrow and they think it's just, voting in elections. But when we're looking at the risks that we're seeing to our democracy, and whether they are long-term risks, whether they are immediate risks, or whether they're even sort of rapid response risks given sort of situations that are happening in particular moments in particular states or communities, what we're seeing is that there are so many people who are so passionate about wanting to help and wanting to give, but it's really, really hard to figure out who to give to, right? Whether it's something's happening in Minnesota, and then I'm giving a bunch of phone calls saying, who should I give to in Minnesota right now? Or, oh, I really care about helping people with disabilities vote, but it's really hard to Google and figure out, like, who am I supposed to give to, and what are they doing, and are they actually working, and can I trust this, GuideStar, which is now Candid, whatever. And it can be really complicated. And so we are about to launch a new platform that we've developed that we're calling Democracy Portfolios, which are essentially us pre-vetting organizations that fit a variety of categories. So for instance, investment in rural areas. I moved 2 years ago from Los Angeles to a really, really small, really rural town in Southern Arizona, 20 minutes from the Mexican border, actually to help take care of my librarian grandmother, who is now 95 and still has books everywhere, and just yells at MSNBC all day now. The difference in the types of resources and activities and care and things that are available in small rural areas, the type of political investment that happens and doesn't happen here versus in, a major city like LA, is pretty stark. And so there are a lot of organizations that are really trying to help focus on, how do we support rural candidates, how do we support rural voters, how do we support rural libraries, et cetera. So we're looking then at, all right, if that's an issue folks care about, let's find 5 or so organizations that are really doing good work in this space, and then help people direct giving to them. And so we're really excited. It's called Democracy Portfolios. It should be out in a couple of weeks. And our goal is to, in this particular moment, especially, help people feel that they are giving in a way that is really, truly impactful while being less confusing. And so for anyone who knows stocks in the stock market, we're basically doing for democracy giving what index funds did for stocks, which was take a million different very confusing stocks and put them in a few index funds, and you say, here, you can just give to the vice fund. Don't give to the vice fund, but you could give to the vice fund, and it makes it less confusing. I'm sure there's a library fund. So that's when I think about sort of where we are right now, I'm one of the few people who I am so relentlessly optimistic about our future. I look at Americans in the last year and a half, and I just think we've been so extraordinary. The courts have been amazing. As an attorney, I am so passionately in love with the courts right now, and how incredible they've been, and how they've upheld the Constitution, and how they've upheld our laws. I think they've been really extraordinary. I think that we've seen so many local and federal judges showing so much courage and intelligence. I think the American people have come out in waves and shown how much we care about our communities, and shown how much we care about our country and each other. And I think that when I see who we are and who we've been, it is so clear that we are headed for a really remarkable next 250 years that are built on even more equity and justice than the first 250. So I am thrilled. I am excited. I think these sorts of gatherings are exactly the things that we need in order to uphold and push our democracy forward. And I am just always honored to be in rooms with people like this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kat. That's really really interesting, the democracy portfolios. I look forward to learning more about it when it comes out. Our next speaker is Dr. Selene Selene. I did that right? Selene. Yeah. Gomez. Turn it over to you, Selene.
And I am going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I know that it's not easy to, listen to so many talks. I really appreciate you all investing your time today. As Julie mentioned, I'm Selene Gomez. I'm the National Field Director for VoteRiders. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about voter ID, documentary proof of citizenship, some of the resources that we use and that we offer to libraries and to just partner organizations, share different ways that we've worked with other libraries in case you're interested in also participating in that. And then just being able to kind of give you an outlet of what are different things that you can do between now to election day. I think yesterday marked the 100 days from midterm elections. So the countdown is officially on. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here with you all. Before I dig into the actual issues, just so you know, VoteRiders, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that focuses on eliminating ID barriers, whether it's through education and outreach, through voter ID assistance, or through advocacy. And so, as David had mentioned in his presentation, right, talking about the wave and why didn't it go a certain way in 2012? In 2012, we started to see voter IDs really coming up on state legislatures, which is where VoteRiders came from. And since, for better or worse, we've been on the ground for 14 years. You know, an organization is there and meant to be dissolved because the issue is addressed. Unfortunately, the issue of voter ID has not been addressed. Unfortunately, it's been going towards the opposite direction, but we're still here and providing free direct assistance and services to voters while also trying to mitigate and to advocate against certain bills, especially that I'll talk about in a bit that have been recently introduced. So again, we have our free tools and services that are available to everybody. We work year round, so it doesn't matter if you reach out to us on January of 2027, right after the midterm elections, all of our programming is going full force. Now for 2026, we do have on the ground programs in these 7 states that are listed below. However, all of our tools and services could be used remotely. You don't need to have people on the ground. It just looks a little bit different, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But these are the states. If you're in any of these states, please reach out to me if you want to be connected with our staff on the ground. If you're not on these states, but you're one of the 38 states that have a voter ID law, would still love to connect with you. And even for those that don't have a voter ID law, we do know that unfortunately the voter ID confusion spills over just because people talk about it so much. So just know that while our funds are to help people get a state identification for those that live in voter ID states, when it comes to education and addressing confusion, we have to do it everywhere because through our helpline, we've noticed that there's even voters in states that don't have voter ID laws currently where they call us and they're very confused and they think that they need one. And I'll talk a little bit more about it through the most recent research that we've done. So for the impact of voter ID laws, this is a color-coded map just to give you an idea. The few that are in black are the ones that don't have a voter ID law today. However, there are ballot initiatives and others that are on ballots. To give you some examples, California and Nevada, they do have ballot initiatives that they have in the November ballots, and if passed, there would be a voter ID law. But they're still, voters still need to vote on those. But other than that, the pink and the purple ones, those are the 38 out of the 50 states that have some form of voter ID law. The ones that are in pink are to say that either they didn't have a voter ID law, and since the elections in 2020, they have one now, or they used to have a voter ID law, but now it became more strict. Just to give you an example, I'm based in Texas. And Texas had a voter ID law well before 2020, but they actually changed the voter ID law because they were also implementing it for mail-in ballots. And so they required an ID number. For those of you who may have kept up with that in 2022, it led to rejecting 25,000 ballots to where then Texas had to revisit that. And we were able to reach out to all of those 25,000 individuals through FOIA request and other programming that we have that if you're interested in being a part of, I'll be more than happy to share more information. It's later on the slide to be able to ensure that we are reaching out to those populations that maybe unfortunately their ballot didn't count or was rejected at the time. Now, in addition to this, one of the challenges on voter ID is that you wouldn't necessarily think about it. I was guilty of it before I came to VoteRiders. Quite honestly, in 2018, didn't really think much of voter ID, which meant that there wasn't a lot of research out there either. So we partnered up with the University of Maryland, with PublicWise, and also with the Brennan Center. And we did an updated study to really see, okay, what are some of the barriers, and just really ask about voter ID. And we found that 34.5 million voting age US citizens lack a current government issued voter ID. This means that they don't have a current identification that is unexpired, that their address and their name match. And out of that, the people without driver's licenses, right? There's about 20 million US citizens that don't have a driver's license. And out of those 20 million that said they didn't have a driver's license, identified that either there was a financial constraint or a bureaucratic constraint. As we know, it takes money, it takes time. Sometimes, and they're only operating during office hours, so people may have to take a day off of work. And if you've had experiences, as Kat had mentioned at the DMV, sometimes you have to be going over and over because you may not have the documents that they say that you need at the time. And so it does not only require you to pay money, but it also takes away from your wages oftentimes. And so some individuals just don't have their state identification or their state driver's license, which is typically one of the identifications that is accepted in any of the states that have voter ID laws, as long as their information is updated. We also found that 55% of US citizens in states where a photo ID is required to vote in person don't know what's required to vote. So they may know that you may need an ID, they may not know it. And if they know that you need an ID, they may not know what IDs are accepted. And so we see that the confusion is really present there. And then also finding that, along with other voter suppression, legislation or bills that pass, citizens of color are almost 4 times more likely not to have a current government issued photo ID compared to white citizens. So we know that the vulnerable population, the most vulnerable populations, and we know who it affects for the most part. Now, digging in deeper into the 55% of the individuals who live in a state that has a voter ID law that do not know that they need to bring an ID to the polls, that percentage is even higher when it comes to voter ID laws, voting by mail, because those are different within the voter ID laws that each state has. Also, we know that young voters are the most likely to be confused about these laws and not have all of the information. And then we also know that poll workers can be confused by these laws because they may be unclear on what ID is actually required. And we've seen this in partnership with election protection and with other national partners where, and quite honestly, again, I'm in Texas and I've seen it with some of my friends when they go and vote and then they call me and I have to tell them, hey, tell the poll worker this or whatever it may be, to at a minimum be able to get a provisional ballot, not just be turned away. Now, I talked about voter ID laws, right? Voter ID laws are the identification that a state tells you and the list of the identifications they accept so you can prove your identity when you go to the polls at the time that you go and vote. Now, what we're also seeing is documentary proof of citizenship, which is now needing physical proof at the time of registering to vote that you are a US citizen. And this is generally with your US passport or your birth certificate. So these are 2 different things, right? At the first step of registering, if there's documentary proof of citizenship, which for example, in Arizona, there is, there you have to provide that. And then there's another law, the voter ID law, right? Of at the time, every time you go to the polls from now on, then you need to show that identification. When it comes to the documentary proof of citizenship, it's at the time of registration, or if you want to change anything on your voter registration. Let's say you moved, for instance. For me, if I registered before documentary proof of citizenship laws passed, I'm fine. But then if I was to move and I need to change my address, then I would have to provide that documentation as well. We also did research on proof of citizenship because unfortunately we kind of saw the writing on the wall in the sense of we're going to see this come up a lot more in state legislatures. So we found that over 21 million of US citizens don't or wouldn't be able to easily access a passport or their birth certificate or any other documentation that proves their citizenship. This means that if you told one of the 21 million citizens, hey, you need to provide this tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to necessarily do it, whether it's because a relative maybe has their documents or, it may be stored somewhere that's not easily accessible, whatever it may be. And 13% of US citizens do not have ready access to their birth certificates. So something that we know is a vital document, there's quite a bit of individuals who don't have easy access to this. And about 150 million US citizens do not have a passport. So this is something to also keep in mind because you need these documents for other things as well. And groups that are most harmed by voter ID and documentary proof of citizenship laws, as you'll see, unfortunately, is the same groups that would be affected by any other, voting laws. If it affects voter registration or whatever it may be, youth, BIPOC voters, newly naturalized citizens, especially if they don't update their status to US citizen at their local DMV, trans and non-binary voters also that their gender marker may not reflect, what they identify as, voters with disabilities and so forth. And so we know that these are a lot of the constituents that you see in libraries, right? And so we definitely see an overlap in a lot of the work that we do with libraries. So when I speak a little bit more on our resources, I'll get a little bit more into that. But before we do, what is happening now is that I spoke about voter ID and documentary proof of citizenship because we've all heard about the SAVE Act, the Safe America Act, all these different versions. And as of last week, the Save America Act, which was for documentary proof of citizenship, was added to the National Defense Authorization Act, and it was passed out of the House last week and is now, to see if the Senate will hear it. There's also a separate National Voter ID Act that was passed last week as well. It was kind of just tagged on into this unrelated insider trading bill, and it was passed out of the House last week as well. And so now it's waiting, and we're going to see if the Senate is going to hear it. We do have a call to action. I'm more than happy to share the link where you can go there to our site and you can put your information, and it would send it to your senators to not have them hear this bill. So I'll definitely share that link out, but feel free to also share it far and wide in trying to address this. So how is VoteRiders helping out in the field, and how are we partnering with individuals to be able to do this? So we do voter ID assistance. We help voters year-round to get an ID and give them any information that they may need on how is it or what do you need to be able to go at the time that you're going to go and cast your ballot. Truth is that getting an ID costs money and it can take a lot of time, like I said, right? If you need a copy of your birth certificate, that's not free. You need to go, not only do you have to order it, and it may take weeks or months depending on where you're getting it from and what your situation is, but you also have to pay for it. So we help track down the key documents to be able to get that identification. We cover the cost. We also have somebody who helps either guides you through it or helps you with the process. We arrange and pay for transportation to the ID issuing office if you have to go back because maybe there was something else that they said that you needed. We're able to go ahead and cover that. And there's actually instances where you do need some legal assistance, maybe because your documents may not match perfectly or whatever it may be. So we provide pro bono legal assistance as well on a case by case when needed. We also have our helpline and chatbot, and so encourage you all to keep this in mind. You can call or text us. You can also go to our website. You can email us at helpline@voteriders.org. Or I know this is totally going to date us, but you can use Facebook Messenger and get in touch with us. This is a person, if you need help, you're able to chat with a VoteRider staff or volunteer, both in English or in Spanish. And the first two questions are, what language do you prefer? The second is, what state do you live in, to make sure that we provide the information that you need. But then after that, you can go straight to your question because you're chatting with a live individual. So this is a really good resource to have. And the best way to disseminate it is through our voter ID information cards, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But this is a really good resource for you all to have in libraries as you all host, job fairs or resource fairs. We know that while we help individuals get their state ID to vote, it's a holistic approach in the sense that you need it for other aspects of your life. It increases your quality of life, right? You need it for employment, you need it for housing, you may need it for other benefits and so forth. So definitely take advantage of the fact that we're able to do that. We also have digital assets. As I had mentioned, there's specific vulnerable populations that are more impacted by voter ID laws, but in different ways. Trans and non-binary voters are one of them, student voters, voters with disabilities, newly naturalized citizens. And so we'll share the slides here and you can get those QR codes. And those are specific pages that we have for those specific groups in case you have any questions on those. Now, how can you get involved? Well, as I said, we have our information cards. So we have our small palm cards. We have them for all 50 states plus DC. We have them both fully in English and in Spanish. And you can order this for free as long as you are a nonpartisan entity or you operate as one. I can tell you that there's been a ton of libraries who have taken advantage of this because it's just very easy. You can have it on a resource table or you can have it in the reception area. And whenever somebody comes in asking about, state ID, you're able to give them that because our palm cards not only give you the voter ID law for your state, it also gives you ways that you can contact us and how we can help, right? Whether it's getting your birth certificate, transportation to the ID issuing office, whatever it may be. Again, these are completely free of charge for nonpartisan organizations. We have worked with a lot of libraries. Just to give you some examples, in the Houston area, we work with all the branches. I believe, I know it's over 40, it might be about 42 branches, but we were able to work with the central headquarters and now they actually order cards and they distribute them in all of their 40 plus branches. We also work, if you're part of the county libraries, we're able to do that as well. But also if you're working on a library on a campus, and not only having the information cards, but then also having the student specific resources on hand to be able to help students get their state ID, which again, right, if maybe they don't have a car, they didn't get their driver's license, they don't have their state ID, but they may need it for other things. So these are just some of the ways that we've worked with these information cards. We also have the digital versions of them. So if you are more, digital heavy or tech heavy, we also have the digital versions to where you can share them as a picture or through a shortened link. And you can send it to people. You can also use the digital version to put it in e-newsletters or, just whatever resources that you want to disseminate as well. We also do voter ID clinics. This is where we work with libraries a ton. The voter ID clinics are one-on-one assistance with voters. So these could be in person or virtually. So if we have stuff on the ground, we're happy to do it in person. But if we're not, we can do virtual ones in the sense, as long as you have a computer and you have Wi-Fi, we can actually work with you and we can have somebody who's trained and ready to do it. And they can start doing intake forms. This can be a one-off event, or if you want to say, hey, every first Monday of the month, I would love to be able to promote this kind of resource, we would be more than happy to work with you and get that going. There's also other ways. You can also send referrals to us and we can formalize a process for that if that's easiest for you. But these voter ID clinics have been very successful. And libraries in particular, libraries and churches have really liked the model. And they have the resources to do it essentially. Like I said, as long as there's a computer and there's Wi-Fi, we're able to do the rest of it as long as we just have one person who can kind of monitor and make sure that they set it up initially. We also have a community of volunteers. So if you want to sign up to volunteer, you are more than welcome to. We have both one-time events, text banks, phone banks, letter writing parties. So we get lists of voters in different states that we target that we know that have a voter ID law where they maybe their ballot was rejected or maybe they're new citizens and they haven't changed their status from permanent resident to citizen. Or sometimes we even work with other partners that have their own list of voters that they've registered. And then we talk to them about voter ID because they live in a state that has a voter ID law. If you're interested in just checking out our events, it's a couple of hours. It's usually on Thursday evenings. You can scan the QR code. Also, if you want something more long-term, we can train you to help individuals get the documents that they need to get their state identification. We also have a QR code for you to refer voters to us. You kind of go into the intake form straight away and you're able to take care of that. We also do voter ID training. So if you want to do a presentation on voter ID of your state, we're more than happy to work with you and do that. Again, all of our resources are fully bilingual in English and in Spanish. So for us, we have the resources, but partners are key to making the change. Partners are the trusted messengers of communities. Partners are what help us really disseminate the information and provide the assistance that we provide. We work with democracy groups, with schools, with direct service providers, with libraries, with churches, athletic organizations, even corporations and other groups in trying to, when it comes to doing their social impact and things like that. We are in a unique position where we're able to cast a wide net of partners because we're able to help get a state identification, which is needed for so many different things. And then from there also, as Emily had said, talking to them about voting and asking them to register to vote. Sometimes it's as simple as nobody's asked me before. And so a lot of these populations that we are interacting with are the most vulnerable populations and populations that no campaign has talked to them because they're not in any kind of list. And so for us, our goal is to get them on those lists so then they can have conversations about voting in the future as well. So if I mentioned something that you're interested in, or you're interested in partnering in another way, and I didn't mention it as well, we're always looking for innovative ways to work with different organizations, especially libraries, because we've had such a great history in working with libraries and communities. Please feel free to reach out to me at selene@voteriders.org, and we can definitely continue this conversation. And I look forward to any questions that you all may have during the Q&A portion.
Thank you so much, Selene. And yes, I want to encourage, that was great. Everybody's been so great. Just I'm learning so much or glad to be highlighting stuff that I knew, but other people might not know. And just, yes, please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And now finally, we'll go on to Chris. Chris, are you ready to take this on?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Let me figure out, make sure I do this right. The share thing. Okay.
Yes, can see it.
Yes, and it moves.
Yes.
All right. Hi, everybody. I feel like we gotta shake a little bit. Great presentations. I was just sitting on Zoom for a minute. Thanks for having me. Really interesting stuff to talk about, especially in this time. I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of tension, a lot of worry, all rightfully so. And so just thinking about voting and social change, preparing for this was really helpful for me to, even get my thoughts and perspective together. And so, I was really just thinking about voting as a tool. I think sometimes it's framed as like either we're going to do this or nothing or everything over here and not do this. And so, how do we think about it in another way? And so I think I I want to take a step back and think about it as part of a process versus the solution. And so I guess I'm taking a bit of the negative in this discussion from my counterparts. But I do agree with them that voting is a useful way for humans to enable collective decision making. It's been really interesting to hear everyone talk about um, who is allowed to vote, who isn't allowed to vote, and even this term citizen, which has made me think a lot about how exclusionary this process actually is when trying to make collective decisions as a species, right? Depending on who you are, where you're from, it determines whether or not you're allowed to participate in the very decision making that impacts your lives, your children's lives, right? And so, what makes a citizen so special? And so thinking about it in that context too, I also agree with folks around, these attacks on voting rights are terrible and they're extremely racist. And we should all be involved in the fight against these racist attacks. We all know thousands upon thousands of workers across all hues, but especially Black workers, fought and shed blood to continue the journey towards a society based on equality. And I think that's really what the essence of the fight for the right to vote was, around equality. They knew they didn't have many people to vote for, especially at that time. Um, but they wanted to have the same rights as everyone else. And I agree that we should have a society based on equality, and that's what we should all be fighting for. I think the question is, will voting in and of itself get us to that society? Personally, I don't think so. And if we think of voting as a tool, then we must understand its capabilities and limits within the context of the social, political, economic world in which we live in, which is capitalism. Um, and so the image you see, these are children in the Democratic Republic of Congo mining cobalt. Do they have a say in the foreign policy of Apple or the United States? Do they get to vote in what happens that they are forced to work in these mines? And I think as we begin to interrogate voting as a lever within a larger governance structure, I believe we got to ask some essential questions. Who does this governance structure support? And also, under what conditions do we vote? So voting in our society is a mechanism within a governance structure that is designed to uphold the class dictatorship of the capitalists. And so I think I have the weirdest point of view or pathway to this talk as a designer, not a librarian. I love libraries, but and also someone who, admittedly does not vote. Um, but I think this conversation is so important. Um, and so again, if we think about voting as a mechanism within a governance structure that is designed to uphold a particular system, then we have to be very clear about that system. And so, we know capitalism is a class society that essentially demands there be some people with everything, and the vast majority of humans will have little to nothing. And so we also have to be clear that the way those few get everything is through the exploitation of the labor of the many. And so I think another important question is, how do a few people get away with this mass exploitation of folks and exploitation of the planet? I'm glad people started bringing up, climate change is a big part of our society that we have to contend with now. Um, and so Marx argues that it's partially through the illusion of choice that the few are able to maintain this class domination. And so the ballot box gives us the illusion that we are somewhat in control of the material conditions of our reality, but essentially we are allowed to choose who gets to manage the capitalist system. Mamdani recently exposed this truth by saying socialists can not only understand economics just as well as the capitalists, but we can solve their years of mismanagement. Now, he wasn't talking about liberation. He was talking about being able to control the reins of exploitation of people and the planet. I think another question we have to ask is, what aren't we allowed to vote on? We are all experiencing climate change, increased sexism, racism, income inequality, and we're all witnessing multiple genocides simultaneously in real time because of inter-imperialist rivalry. We are living in a period of intensifying fascism, but none of these issues have ever been on the ballot, but they're integral to our daily lives. My presentation will focus on fighting racism as a key activity to advancing social change and building the conditions to create a world free of the dictatorship of the capitalist class. So I want to talk about class struggle as a catalyst for social change, and we're going to talk about them through four, main or critical events that essentially define the context in which we're currently talking about voting, right? Slavery is a major part of this country's history that has created the basis for the institutions we know today that I think David talked about a lot, the Supreme Court, Congress, all that stuff, and how they were, essentially designed and created to maintain power for the budding capitalist class at that time. But I really want to focus on how class struggle and fighting leads to social change. And so it's an alternative to voting, that our only mechanism for changing the world is not through the ballot box. It is through our, as David said, grabbing and bending the arc towards justice. So we'll talk a bit about the Civil War, the anti-lynching campaign, the integration movement, and then most recently, the Great Awakening. And so, we know this country was founded on slavery and genocide of Native folks. It was not based on equality and justice and democracy for all. It was not about everyone's voice. And so, but the process to getting rid of that institution was not through the ballot box. It was through armed violence, to be honest. And three of the folks that many of us know, Nat Turner starts his rebellion in 1831, which then inspires other folks to fight. And Nat Turner and John Brown were both preachers, but felt that the institution of slavery was an abomination to God, and therefore they had to fight and give everything they could to destroy this institution of slavery. Harriet Tubman, a shero of mine, right? Freed many folks, but then continued to fight. Joined the Union Army, became a spy, basically a general in the military, to destroy this institution that was not on the ballot. There was never going to be a point in time where they could vote away slavery. We know parts of Texas, the West Coast, they adopted slavery and changed their laws so that they could be a part of the institution because it was profitable. I think a lot of times we focus these arguments on a moral aspect when under capitalism it is essentially about profit. And if it makes them money, which racism does, they will continue to do it. And therefore, we will not be allowed to vote it away, which I think, racism is what all of you have been talking about with disenfranchisement. Racism and sexism are the crux of those challenges. So we have this mass movement against the institution of slavery. Almost 1 million folks die in the Civil War to destroy it, but they don't stop, right? The institution of racism and capitalism continue. They're now forming themselves much deeper into the bedrock of the country. This is also the time when folks like Teddy Roosevelt are building out the imperialist arm of the United States. So, good old Puerto Rico is now a colony because of Teddy Roosevelt, the Philippines, right? People are now have less voice and choice in their lives. In Puerto Rico, they have a water crisis because the US government will not fund their infrastructure. They don't get a vote on that. They don't get to vote on who's the president, right? They don't get that collective decision-making power because of the demands and the needs of the capitalist class. So after the Civil War, the United States went through this era called Reconstruction to quote unquote reunite the country and figure out what to do with the newly freed millions of Black folks who were formerly enslaved. But this period was met with extreme racist violence, and the weapon of choice was lynching. From 1877 to 1950, there were over 4,000 lynchings across the United States, and those are just the documented ones. Um, and so we assume there are many more. And so a lot of those lynchings were concentrated in the South. The heat map on the left shows the lighter the color, the more lynchings in that particular county, the darker the color, the fewer. But during the height of the racial terror lynching, excuse me, there was a young married white woman who accused a Black man in Darien, Georgia, of rape after she gave birth to a biracial baby. The man she accused turned himself in to the police, believing that jail would be a safer place than the racist lynch mobs that he was sure would come for him. His sons did not believe the jail would be a safe place for their father, and so they organized the Black men in the town to stop his transfer to Savannah. The transfer of Black prisoners was a tactic the legal system would use to get folks lynched. Racist mobs would wait for them, string them up. The men that they organized stopped working in a coordinated effort from farms to the mills that they were working in at the sound of a church bell, and they descended upon the train station with rifles and forced the police to take the man back to their county jail. They then surrounded the jail to make sure no racists could get to him. He was finally tried and found not guilty. But the interesting part in this is that after this act of resistance, there was no racist violence in the town. Typically, the white mobs, the KKK, would come in and terrorize Black communities after they would resist. But what actually ended up happening was the white leadership created a multiracial committee to make decisions about the town of Darien. So it wasn't through voting, but it was armed resistance and class struggle that saved this man's life and then actually gave these Black folks the ability to make decisions about their lives. And so Georgia's lynch mob was the second worst in the South, only after Mississippi. But after the Darien insurrection, the Georgia coast had the fewest lynchings in the state. There was another story in Macon, Georgia, where a white mob attacked a son and mother, and the Black folks in the town, they called the bottom, they set up armed resistance. They fought. The National Guard came in, destroyed the Black community. But everyone said after that time, it was 1946, after that fight back, they finally started treating Black folks as people. And so, again, just seeing class struggle as another mechanism for making change, but essentially the most effective for fighting racism. And so I'll move forward a little bit. I am from Chicago, so this is near and dear to my heart. Chicago, the Chicago Tribune said Chicago isn't just segregated, it basically invented modern racial housing segregation. So if you've ever been here, you will see there are certain parts of town that are all Black, there are certain parts all white, certain parts all Latin, all Asian. That is how it is broken up by design, from racial housing covenants to racist violence. And so the meatpacking industry was a major part of the Chicago economic scene. And so when Black workers came up from the South, many got jobs at the meatpacking plants. My great grandfather was one of them. And others, a good job was at the Pullman Porter cars. Um, and so once they got these jobs, they started making enough money to move out of the designated Black areas. And so one of the areas was Inglewood, which is on the south side. People have probably heard of it from the news. It is a very devastated community now. But it used to be an all-white neighborhood. And so when Black meatpacking workers started to move into Inglewood, they were getting attacked. And so the Meatpackers Union was organized by the CIO, which is a communist-led organization that fought for multiracial trade unionism, essentially. And so when their brothers and sisters were getting attacked, they would send meat packers down to Inglewood, and they would do two things. They would do political education and tell them, hey, don't attack, our Black sisters and brothers. They're your sisters and brothers. And then the second one was, but if you do, we will come fight you. And so that allowed for more Black meatpacking workers and other Black workers to start moving into Inglewood, which then a lot of these races started to move west to Market Park, which is the image you see on the right. And if you've ever seen Blues Brothers, they talk about they hate Illinois Nazis. The scene is filmed in Market Park. And so Market Park was the headquarters for the Nazi Party uh, in the 60s, 70s. And so this also kind of a pride point. My parents were involved in this fight to get the Nazis out of Market Park. And so my dad would tell stories of they would go out weekly and just have battles with the Nazis uh, to get them to stop attacking Black bus drivers who had to drive that way and stop attacking Black postal workers, and to build multiracial unity. And so they continued to do that until 1979. They had a major march, um, and the Nazis never showed up. And so it kind of broke their stronghold on Market Park. Market Park is now one of the most integrated neighborhoods in Chicago. It used to be a home for a lot of Palestinian workers, but after 9/11, the racism got really strong, and now they've moved further west. But just another example, and Chicago's a Democratic city and a Democratic state, and it is one of the most racist cities you've ever come to. Um, and then finally, the most recent one, the international response to the racist murder of George Floyd, where we saw millions of people around the world fighting against racial injustice. And one thing, I wanted to highlight is that a lot of the issues that we don't get to vote on are typically economic ones, right? They don't allow us to vote on our exploitation at the workplace. And they typically tell us they don't have money for the things that we need. But after the mass rebellions around George Floyd, capitalists found $200 billion within a year that they dedicated to racial justice. Now, we all know they didn't do much with it. They didn't follow through on all that money, but we did see them give to nonprofits, give to Black-led organizations, um, in ways that they swore they could never do. They even started giving out a little bit of money for reparations. Um, and so we see that these mass movements, these class struggles really become strong vehicles for social change, but especially around fighting racism. And now all the examples I've given during this presentation have all been overturned or rescinded in major ways, which I think begs the question, why? Why are there still slaves in United States prisons? Why are Black folks being lynched again at alarming rates? Why are Chicago schools as segregated now as they were in the 1960s? Why did the police kill more people last year than at any other time since they started tracking? And I would argue that is because it's the natural state of capitalism. They need intense racism, and so they will always revert back to what is and what they will never allow us to vote away. So if we're going to have the equitable anti-racist world we all deserve, I think we have to fight and build more class struggle to destroy capitalism.
Thank you, Chris. I love your last slide too. It goes with I have a t-shirt that says troublemaker on it. It goes with that. So thank you, everyone. And now I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A. Not seeing anybody posting questions. Anybody would like to post a question or
There are some questions in the shared document.
Oh, there are. Okay. All right. I have to remember how to get to the shared document. Or do you want to read them? Or let's see, let me get to them. Sorry, I opened it, but I didn't
Put
look
them
at
in
it.
the chat for you.
Oh, thank you, April. That's so kind. Okay. Does the ID? Okay, here we go. For Kat, does the ID bill include financial support for supplies for libraries and post office to provide IDs?
So you, okay, I'm gonna try to remember the exact website. I think it's id4id.org. So what we did strategically with this bill, because we did not want members of Congress sitting around debating about how much money it would cost to get someone an ID, because we'll be 275 years old before the bill passes. So the way the bill is structured is that it would basically pass a law saying we can do this, create a committee that would include a variety of stakeholders, including librarians, post office, and whatever, who then would come up with the financial portion. It's a little complicated. It's Congress, but it's structured in such a way so that we don't have Congress sitting around deciding how much money every single library and post office in America could get for a bill. I think the underlying, forgive me, but it feels like the underlying intent of the question is, did we think about what this would actually cost as far as resources and et cetera for libraries? And we did, which is why we tried to take the decisions about what that should look like out of the hands of Congress and put it into the stakeholders who actually know what it would actually take so that we can make realistic decisions. So that's the answer to that.
Great, thank you. Any other? Okay. And then you guys can probably see it, but how do we balance encouraging election participation while also opposing ID laws? Anybody having? That's for everyone. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I would say for us at VoteRiders is we see the confusion, but we don't try to add to it, right? Like saying, like, let's dig through the noise and this is what you need, like, which is why we provide information with the simplest language, with just, okay, this is what you need. You don't have it. Let's help you get it. And it takes a lot more, but we're doing it on a case by case basis, right? By helping, talking to a person, telling them this is what you need. And then hopefully even doing some relational organizing in the sense that we give them our cards and be like, hey, talk to your family about it. If you know anybody who needs help, like come to us on doing that. And it's hard. It's, when you say encouraging participation while opposing ID laws, we have found that people say, what's the big deal about voter ID laws? And so not as many people as you think would oppose ID laws oppose them necessarily. And that's part of the challenge, because you just say, well, what's the big deal? And people don't know everything that it takes, right? Administrative racism, right? And the DMV centers and all these things, like all these underlying things that you have to go through to ultimately be able to get that ID. For us, it's trying to not intimidate the voter, encourage them to be a part of it. But also recognizing that voting is the first step, right? People come frustrated and say, well, I voted and nothing happened. And I'm like, well, that's the beginning of an engagement ladder. Like that's the bare minimum that we could and should be doing. But then we also have to hold people accountable. We have to kind of, go up from that and explaining that. And it's, with this, if you don't have a state ID, you can't even take that first step of being able to participate in elections and really being able to get involved in your community, which is what we try to encourage and we try to do.
I'll just piggyback on that. I wrote a whole book about this called American Identity in Crisis, because I think, what Selene said is exactly right. Well, on all the fronts, but on multiple fronts, one, that I think there's a lot of confusion about even the need to balance, right? One of the things that I and most people sort of work in voting thought was so perfect about 2020 was that, first of all, I'm an introvert, so lockdown was the greatest year of my life. But other than that, one of the things that we saw in that election is that because we were in the middle of this crisis, we had to, and by we, I mean the federal and state governments, had to enact pretty much every voting provision that voting rights activists have been begging for forever, right? Everybody had mail-in voting. We had voting centers that were open forever. We had so many different laws that were changed either permanently or on an emergency basis because everyone had to vote from home. And what did we see? We saw that more young people vote than ever before. We had more poor people vote than ever before. We had more seniors, right? We had incredible turnout. And that's why we're seeing such a reaction now, because it proved the thing that a lot of us have been saying forever. Everybody wants to vote, right? Like we don't have a situation in which there are people who don't understand the impact of voting. We have people who may, for political reasons or whatever, think that they don't want to vote or not understand the impact, etc. But for the most part, when you talk to people, they get voting is important. Young people really get voting is important because they understand why there are people trying so hard to prevent them from voting. And what we saw in 2020 is when we take away the micro barriers, people turn out to vote. People turn out to vote in insane numbers. People turn out to vote in such big numbers that we have now seen backlash for the last 6 years of politicians saying, oh crap, we need to not ever let that happen again. Everybody voted. So when we're looking at, and this is, so much of what we focus on and with our programs and Spread the Vote is it's less encouraging participation and more opening the doors for participation, right? So there's a reason that we have 92% turnout among our incarcerated voters with our vote by mail-in jail program and 100% turnout in Wayne County and Cook County jails, right? It's because people who are incarcerated understand how much of their life is impacted by the policies and politicians who are elected, and they would love to vote, and we don't make that available to them. So when we do, they're like, hell yeah, I'm voting. And so I think that it is not necessarily even a question of opposing ID laws, which we know we should do, and encouraging participation. It's more opening those doors. People want to vote, and we can do both at the same time, and they don't really interfere with each other at all.
Great, thank you. I don't know if anyone else we have 2 more questions. I'm going to try to cover both of them. So I'll just move on to those, and then if you have comments about anything else, anybody. In the Q&A, we have, thank you, Chris. How do we build this movement? Is there an organization or party that does this? I think is what you was, yeah.
I think there's a lot of organizations. I think the one that my parents were involved in and I kind of grew up around was called Progressive Labor Party. And so, yeah, I grew up very much understanding that racism was a terrible thing and that we had to commit ourselves to fighting it, and therefore having to build a new society. And so, I think they've done amazing things, not just in Chicago, but in other folks. Sorry, I just saw something today. It was saying this is an anniversary of when the United States took over Haiti, which, is a country that's devastated and continues to be devastated for their anti-racist work, defeating the French in the 1800s. And so, my mom went to Haiti after the earthquake with the organization. And so I just think about, the ways in which we have to get much deeper. We have to get involved in a much deeper level to address the things that hold people back, right? Cook County, to your point, the jail is one of the most deplorable places on the planet. It is also our largest mental health facility because they refuse to fund mental health services here in the city. But they fund mass incarceration of Black and Latin workers at an extreme rate. So yeah, I just think about, and so being involved in those fights too. So that's the organization that comes to mind as the one that I know the most about.
Thank you. And then the last question that we have is, how could we use libraries to be a place for organizing to fight racism? And I think that's probably for everyone. And then somebody's added a comment, especially when there are probably members of all our communities who see that and say that's political, you can't do that, which is a big issue in libraries, this whole, we're neutral, we don't take a stand, which is just so ridiculous. I don't even know how to address that one. So anybody want to talk about that? How could we use libraries as a place for organizing to fight racism?
I will give an example. I mean, so first of all, there are a lot, but I was recently in Washington, D.C. And I don't know if any of you have been to the main library. When I lived there, they were fully renovating it, and it opened after I moved, and I was really upset. So when it reopened, I went, and they had this really incredible exhibit about the Green Book and about it was, I think it was some photographers or whatever, but it was this really incredible exhibit about the Green Book and about traveling as Black American during Jim Crow and et cetera. And it was really extraordinary. It was really beautifully done. It was right in, so if you walk into the DC library, there's this huge sort of center atrium. So it was right there. So it was right there when everyone walked in, and it was really wonderful. And I found that librarians are so creative about how they have used art and community meetings. And, I mean, and I'll use the DC library again, just because I think it's a great example, but they always have such interesting meetings and educational opportunities and things that people come into that may from the outside not seem certainly political, and maybe not even seem that it's about racism or class or societal issues or whatever, but that really actually are, and that are open and available to the public. So I think that there are a lot of ways that you can be creative, but I also think that there are things that libraries do every day that are fighting racism. I mean, libraries are places where people come who are looking for jobs, who are looking for housing, who are looking for benefits and supports in so many ways, and they know they can go to the library, and that's a place where they'll be supported. And like I was saying, I know there's a big movement now to bring social workers into libraries, and there's so many skills trainings that happen. So I think that libraries also do a lot of just very practical hands-on things that help people every day, that are working to improve the lives, to counteract challenges that are resulting from racism or socioeconomic discrimination or whatever else. So I think that there are a lot of ways that libraries are doing that, and creative ways that they can. Oh, that's amazing. That's such a great idea. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a post in the chat. Any other comments on this question, or any other? It's just interesting because we did have, there's sort of underlying contrasts in views, right? Like most of you are really working to try to help people register to vote or be able to vote. And Chris, you're coming in with a different, I don't know, you kind of softened it at the beginning. You didn't really say don't vote, but you said you don't vote. And then also, that it's not going to change the bigger problems because of capitalism. So if anybody, I wish we had more time, because I would really like this conversation to happen where I think there are a lot of people who feel the same way as you, Chris. And then there are a lot of people who are fighting for the right it's like, there's a big story there. But any comments from anybody about that? Let me just see.
Yeah, we have people want to know what he means by class struggle, how to support the class struggle.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
Sure. I would say class struggle is organized resistance to oppression, exploitation. So like just recently, or currently, BP, British Petroleum, has locked out workers in Whiting, Indiana. They've been locked out for 4 months. So I've been going out there with friends and trying to get my block club to go out there to give donations, help give them support, because they're taking on, a giant corporation who, if we talk about climate change, is one of the biggest, enemies of our planet right now. So, that to me is an example of class struggle. I think the example in the chat about the rapid response groups against ICE, that's an example of class struggle. And so, figuring out ways to get involved in these actions against the state, corporations, whatever the thing is that is, harming our fellow people, that we should be involved in that. And I think, Julie, to your point, again, I don't think it's a either or, right? So I don't vote. I have family that does. I have friends that do. That's fine. But I'm always pushing them to do more. Because I think I always hear this notion about holding elected officials accountable, and I've never seen it. The only accountability mechanism that I've seen is like you vote them out in 4 years or whenever their term is up, which by that point, the harm is done, right? So we're all living in this moment. Everybody's terrified of Trump, which again, terrible person, can't stand him. But these problems didn't start with him and they're not going to end with him. So if he gets voted out, which, hopefully happens, ICE is still going to exist. They're still going to be having wars for oil, right? Those are not on the ballot. And so how do we get ourselves involved in changing the actual material conditions that dictate our lives beyond just the managers of capitalism?
All right. Oh, we're at the ending time. We need another hour. I really want this discussion. We're going to have to do a separate thing because I really think this is delving into this is really important. And
There's
so
another follow-up comment that they would like to see the topic about an actual thing on class struggle, a program, Afternoon of Social Justice on class struggle.
yeah, I think that would be great. Let's do it. I'm all for that. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're at our ending time. So it will go ahead and make our final statement. Does anybody, I know we're at their ending time, but does anybody have one last sentence that they want to say just because you're here and it's a chance? Otherwise, I will close it out. No? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. And then I'm going to read our final thing. And thank you to the audience for attending. And this is just a final thing about CERT because it's programs like this that we provide that are free, that are online, that are, we try to have these important discussions and invite people to be part of them. And so this is our statement. We are committed to ensuring that CERT's programs are diverse, inclusive, and free for attendees. In order to do so, we rely on support from ALA membership and direct donations. You can help champion our roundtable's mission and commitments by donating at the link provided. I guess there's going to be a link in the chat, or maybe it's there already. And or by joining CERT as a member. You can make a general gift or select the task force or award that you would like to support. There's Social Responsibilities Roundtable has different task forces under them. Please help us maintain our high quality programming, the core values that sustain it, and our commitment to accessibility by making a donation, becoming a CERT member, or helping to spread the word about our roundtable and events. So thank you, everyone, so much. I really appreciate this was great and exciting, and looks like other people want to have a continuation too, right? Yes, class struggle issues. Yes. Oh, that would be so good. All right. Bye. Thank you.